What's interesting about this is that despite the philosophers' apparent disdain for Paul, the city of Athens itself seemed to have a strong tradition of welcoming different perspectives. At the very least, of celebrating the attempt to know God. And Paul opens not by denigrating that openness, but by recognizing this pursuit itself is the start of divine knowledge. I want to tell you a different story. This one comes from the Hebrew scriptures, way back in the book of 2 Kings. There's a man named Naaman, and he's the favorite general of the king of Aram. And sadly, he contracts leprosy, and no one can help him. But Naaman knows this Israelite woman, and she's told him stories about her God, so he asks permission of his king to go talk to the king of Israel. Now, the king of Aram agrees, sends him with a royal letter and a bunch of gold and silver to pay the God of Israel to heal his general. When he gets there, king of Israel's like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do for you. I can't fix you. Get out of here. Thankfully, the prophet Elisha hears about this, and he sends a messenger telling Naaman to come and see him. But when Naaman packs up and heads over to Elisha is a really busy guy that day. And so instead of meeting with Naaman, he just sends a servant of his with a message, go cleanse yourself in the Jordan River and you'll be healed. Now, Naaman thinks this is silly. But one of his servants is like, listen, we have come this far. We've traveled all this way. It's not going to hurt to take a bath. You probably smell bad anyway. Let's just do this. And so he does, and of course, he's healed. So Naaman wants to go back to Elisha to say thank you. He tries to give him all the gold that he's brought from the king, but the prophet rebuffs the offer, says, I don't need any payment. And so Naaman asks for something. He asks for some dirt. In fact, as much dirt as he can carry with the 2 mules that he's got with him. His plan is, he's going to take that dirt back to Aram. He's going to make his own personal plot of holy land where he will worship the Lord. Now, Elisha thinks this is a great idea, so he says, sure. But as he's about to leave, Naaman has one more request for the prophet. 1 Kings 5:18, he says, may the Lord forgive your servant for this one thing. When my master enters the temple of Rimmon, that's Aram's god, but when he enters the temple to bow down and he's leaning on my arm, I'm going to have to bow there also. And when I bow down in the temple of another god, will the Lord God Yahweh forgive your servant for this? And this is where Elisha has finally had enough. This foreigner wants healing. He wants your dirt. He wants permission to bow down before other gods. Elisha blows a gasket. Get out of here, you dirty, evil, wicked Amorite heathen. Well, not exactly. What Elisha says here is go in peace. And what do these 2 stories have in common? It appears to me, at least, that what they tell us is that the God of the Bible has a lot more grace for our spiritual confusion than we sometimes have for each other. That God, in fact, knows we are often confused. That for the most part, God knows we are spiritually impoverished. That God accepts that a great deal of our spiritual lives will be muddling through and doing our best while leaning on grace to carry us. I think sometimes we imagine that precision is what matters most to God. When very clearly, throughout the scriptures, it is our intent that seems to rule the day. Theological precision in the pursuit of power will have you no closer to the divine. But what I see is that fumbling around on borrowed land, that will bring you to the very presence of God. Another story. My kids have made great friends with this family that lives near us. In fact, they live right across the alley behind us. And that means that the group of them are back and forth between the houses multiple times a day. What's interesting is that this family is Muslim. And that means that when all the kids are over at our house and we bring out anything to eat, the kids, they're not old enough to know all the rules, but they are old enough to know they have to ask if the food is halal. I don't always know. Sometimes I got to Google it. But we do make our best to make sure it's all above board for them. What's been really interesting to watch is how my kids have started to take the initiative for their friends. So rather than grabbing snacks from the cupboard and watching their friends see if they can partake, what my kids will now do is ask if something is halal from Rachel and I before they even bring it out in front of their friends. And actually, it works both ways, because my kids have their own dietary restrictions. They're vegetarian, and I've been able to watch our neighbors take the same initiative to make sure that my kids have options lined up with their convictions at their house. Honestly, it's quite lovely to watch all these kids looking out for each other in this very simple and yet profound way. Now, as a Christian, do I think that any of these dietary restrictions, on either side of the aisle actually, really matter to God all that much? Objectively, I'd say no. In the words of Acts 10:15, do not call anything impure that God has made clean. Subjectively, though, I'd say God is deeply pleased to watch these kids care for each other, look out for each other, respect the convictions of the other. And that's where Paul starts on Mars Hill. I can see you're very religious. I can tell you take all of this seriously. As a Hebrew, it all seems kind of absurd to me, just as my ideas do to you, but the very fact that you have a statue to an unknown God tells me this. You are as interested in finding God as I am. Except here's the thing. God is not made. God made us. God is creator. Therefore, God can't be found through what's been made, can't be found through any of these statues. In fact, you already know this, because here's the thing. I've read your poets. I've been learning from your wisdom. In God we live and move and have our being. That's your Cretan philosopher Epimenides, right? We are God's offspring. That's your Sicilian Stoic Aratus, isn't it? See, what's interesting is that the philosophers want to debate faith with this bird-brained fool who's wandered into town. Paul, though, he's not interested in any of that. And so immediately, when they offer him the stage, he flips the script. I'm not here to find our differences. I'm here because I'm searching for common ground. Debate is what pulls us apart. Conversation, creativity, that's when we start with what we share and we build bridges toward where we can move together. Now, hear me. Is that because Paul doesn't really have convictions that are too strong, or he doesn't think their differences matter all that much? No, Paul is absolutely going to try to convince these folks to see the way the world he does. He just knows instinctively that if they can start with what they share and build from there, then eventually, when they do reach where they disagree, well, maybe there'll be enough tether, an adequate relationship, enough trust to actually hold them together, even in their disagreement. Because, just like my kids, once we care for each other, once we understand each other, once we are committed to looking out for each other, regardless of our difference, what we ultimately find is that honestly, we're all just muddling our way through this thing we call faith, and the best way that we can do that is together.